Andrew Berry stood at that podium on June 2nd and said almost nothing that made headlines. No bombshell, no controversy, no moment where a reporter's sharp question cracked the professional composure and something real leaked out. Just a general manager doing what general managers do. Measured, deliberate, every word passing through some internal filter before it reaches the air. And most people watching walked away thinking it was a standard pre-minicamp press conference with nothing particularly notable inside it. I watched the same press conference and came away thinking something completely different. I think the Cleveland Browns have already decided who their quarterback is. I think Berry told the entire league on June 2nd. And I think almost nobody was listening at the right frequency to catch it. Let me walk you through exactly what I mean, because this requires some real attention to the way NFL executives actually communicate. Not the surface content of their answers, but the architecture underneath them. When Berry's questions about Shedeur Sanders arrived, something in his delivery shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way that would register as significant to someone half watching on a second screen. But if you've spent real time studying how front office executives speak when they're being precise and intentional, when the language they're choosing is doing specific work, you hear it immediately. He wasn't deploying the politely optimistic non-answer that organizations use when a player's standing is genuinely, legitimately uncertain. He was specific in a way that felt purposeful. He talked about decision-making improvements that were real and measurable. He talked about pocket management developing in the right direction, ball security becoming more reliable, situational awareness sharpening in the particular way you hope to see from a young quarterback absorbing a new system in real time. These weren't general compliments. They were the kind of specific, forward-looking observations that an executive makes when he's describing someone whose trajectory the organization has already decided to invest in long-term. And then he used one word that I need you to stop on completely, because it is the single most revealing thing spoken during that entire press conference. Command. Berry said he expects Shedeur Sanders to have command of the offense heading into this season. I want to be careful and precise about why that word matters so much, because I'm not reaching for meaning in casual phrasing here. Command of the offense is not language you use for a prospect. It's not language you reach for when a player's depth chart position is genuinely in flux and you're trying to manage competing interests carefully. Command of the offense is what you say about the quarterback, the one the system is being designed around, the one whose strengths are shaping how the offensive coordinator is building his concepts and calling his plays. It is franchise quarterback language, and it carries a specific weight that people who follow these organizations closely recognize instantly. Andrew Berry did not use that word by accident. He is too precise, too experienced, too deliberate a communicator to fill podium time with words that don't mean anything. When a general manager of his caliber chooses that specific language in a public setting, he's making a statement to other teams, to scouts, to his own locker room, to anyone in the building who needs to understand which direction the organization is pointing. He is saying, in the grammar of how NFL front offices actually communicate, that Shedeur Sanders is their quarterback. Not officially, not in the announcement with a press release sense. But internally, organizationally, fundamentally, the conversation has already concluded. Now hold that and place it directly next to what happened when the Deshaun Watson question arrived, because the contrast is where this entire story actually lives. A reporter gave Berry an opening that was practically gift-wrapped. The question was framed in a way that invited him to validate Watson's NFL experience as a genuine edge in a competition against a second-year quarterback. The diplomatic, professionally graceful answer was sitting right there waiting to be taken. Of course experience matters. Of course a quarterback who has been to multiple Pro Bowls, who has operated at an elite level in this league, who has started high-stakes games with real consequences. Of course that person brings something to a competition that a young player cannot replicate overnight. That answer writes itself. It manages everyone's professional dignity, closes the question cleanly, and reveals nothing of real substance. Berry declined to take it. He flatly, deliberately, chose not to give Watson's experience the status of a genuine competitive advantage. His framing was essentially this: experience is a general attribute, not a specific edge in this particular evaluation context. I need you to actually sit with what that means. Deshaun Watson, the quarterback this organization paid $230 million in fully guaranteed money to acquire. The quarterback they surrendered 3 first-round picks to bring to Cleveland, 3 years of roster-building capital, 3 potential cornerstones of a rebuilt franchise, surrendered for 1 player. That quarterback just had his own general manager stand at a public microphone and tell the entire football world that none of it, not the Pro Bowls, not the starts, not the years of professional experience operating at the highest level, constitutes a meaningful advantage over a second-year player with a handful of career starts. That is not a neutral statement. That is not two sides of the coin management of a genuinely open competition. That is a door closing. Professionally, quietly, with the kind of controlled precision that only executives with real experience can execute cleanly, but closing all the same. Then there was Talon Green, the third piece of this press conference, and in some ways the most clarifying piece precisely because of how different it sounded. 3 words defined Barry's framework for Green: crawl, walk, run. Patient language, long horizon language. The language an executive uses when he's describing a player whose contribution to this season's starting conversation is essentially zero and whose real value to the organization exists somewhere further down the road. That framing is completely appropriate for a 6th-round rookie. It's the right developmental approach, and Barry communicated it with the right measured patience. But place that crawl, walk, run framework directly against the command language used for Shedeur, and the contrast doesn't need interpretation. It announces itself with total clarity. Green received the careful, long-term developmental framing his situation warrants. Shedeur received the language of a franchise centerpiece, a quarterback whose development is being described in present tense terms as an ongoing, active, organizational investment that is already producing visible results. These are not 2 points on the same spectrum. They are fundamentally different categories of conversation happening in the same press conference, and that distinction was not accidental. Here's the context that makes all of this land with its full weight, because NFL press conferences don't work the way casual observers tend to assume. The people standing at those podiums have spent entire careers learning to speak at length while revealing carefully controlled amounts of actual substance. The public language is doing real work. It manages locker room dynamics, protects professional relationships, maintains the dignity of players who haven't been told anything officially yet. You will never hear a general manager say directly that the quarterback they paid $230 million is no longer their answer 2 weeks before mandatory minicamp. That would be organizational chaos. That would be professional negligence. That is simply not how it happens. What you get instead is the structure beneath the language. Which player receives specific, detailed, enthusiastic description, and which receives careful neutrality? Which questions get embraced with genuine momentum, and which get gracefully redirected towards safer territory, where the conviction lives and where it conspicuously, deliberately does not? Barry executed both layers of this simultaneously on June 2nd, with the skill of someone who has operated at this level long enough to make it look effortless. The protocol language was maintained. The competition is genuine. Reps will be earned, not assigned. All of that is true in the technical sense that nothing is formally designated until it is formally designated. But underneath that protocol, in every word choice and every equally deliberate omission, the organizational position was communicated with the precision of a man who knows exactly what he is doing with every syllable. And this press conference didn't come out of nowhere. It's the latest chapter in a story that started being written on draft night, and when you trace it backward, the picture becomes almost impossible to misread. Spencer Rattler, 9th overall, a first-round offensive tackle. You do not spend a top 10 pick on offensive line protection unless you are protecting a quarterback you have already determined is worth that level of investment, not just for this season, but for a long time going forward. That pick was not made with Deshaun Watson's timeline in mind. The football logic doesn't support that reading, and the organizational math doesn't either. That pick was made for a young quarterback whose long-term future in Cleveland the front office has already privately committed to, whose development they are actively building around, whose protection they decided was worth sacrificing significant draft capital to secure. 9th overall. That's not a hedge. That's a declaration. Casey Conception. Denzel Boston at 39. Weapons selected in the first 2 rounds, and not generic weapons assembled randomly. Weapons whose specific skill sets, the quick separation, the reliable hands in traffic, the ability to win underneath and at the intermediate level, complement the strengths of a timing-based, quick processing passer who operates at his best when his short and mid-range options are dependable. These pieces were not gathered accidentally. They were assembled as a coherent picture. And the picture they form has a specific quarterback at the center of it, and that quarterback is not Deshaun Watson. Then there's the defensive side of this roster, which finished in the top 5 last season and hasn't gotten worse in the offseason. A team with that kind of defensive infrastructure doesn't need to force production from a quarterback position. They can win games while a young quarterback develops rhythm and confidence within a system built around his strengths. That structure actually protects a developmental arc in a way that high-octane, score-first environments never can. And the head coach currently running this operation had zero involvement in the Watson acquisition. Zero. He arrived after that chapter had already been written, which means he carries none of the psychological weight, none of the organizational identity, none of the professional need to justify that decision by making it work. He can evaluate the quarterback room with a clarity that the previous staff, embedded in the original investment, could never fully access. Assemble all of that, the draft capital spent and where it was spent, the weapons assembled and what they're designed to complement, the coaching structure in place and what it's free from, the defensive foundation already built, and now a general manager using the word command for one specific quarterback while declining to grant the other a single meaningful advantage in the conversation. Every piece was drawn by the same hand. Every piece points in the same direction. The case for Watson in 2026 was never really a football argument at its core. It was always a psychology argument. $230 million in fully guaranteed money. 3 first-round picks gone permanently. The weight of that investment creates its own gravitational field, pulling organizational decision-making toward justification rather than evaluation. The fear of releasing him and watching him succeed somewhere else. The difficulty of standing up publicly and saying out loud that a commitment of that magnitude did not produce the intended result. Those forces are real, and I won't dismiss them as irrational because they genuinely are not irrational. Sunk cost psychology is one of the most powerful distorting forces in human decision-making precisely because past losses feel more vivid and immediate than future gains. When you've surrendered that much, letting go feels like admitting failure in a way that holding on simply doesn't, even when the football logic of moving forward is overwhelming and obvious. But sunk cost psychology has never won a football game. It traps organizations in the gravitational pull of decisions that cannot be undone, making them reluctant to commit cleanly to a future that requires openly acknowledging the past didn't work. The Browns have been living inside that gravity. What happened at that podium on June 2nd felt like the first clear public signal that they've decided they're done living there. Barry didn't stand at that microphone and announce the end of the Watson era. He didn't need to. He said Shedeur Sanders has command of the offense. He said experience doesn't constitute a competitive advantage in this particular evaluation. He described a rookie's development in patient, long-term language and described a second-year quarterback's development in present-tense franchise centerpiece terms. He chose one specific word for one specific quarterback and withheld it from everyone else in that room. And in the grammar of how NFL front offices actually communicate their internal reality to the outside world, that collection of choices is as close to a formal announcement as you get before the formal announcement is ready to be made. Mandatory minicamp opens June 9th. Every rep will be dissected. Every throw will be measured against the organizational narrative that's been building since draft night. And the quarterback walking into that environment, the one whose voluntary workout reports have been drawing specific, detailed coaching praise, the one whose connection with the new weapons on this roster has been visible and real, the one whose development Barry described with language reserved for quarterbacks organizations have already decided to build around, that quarterback is entering mandatory minicamp not as one half of a genuine open competition, but as the acknowledged internal leader at the position. The competition still has to play out on the field. The reps still have to be taken. The formal designation is still coming. None of that changes what was communicated on June 2nd by a man who chose his words with complete precision. Command. Barry gave that word to one quarterback. He withheld it from everyone else. That choice, in the language NFL front offices use when they communicate what they've actually decided, is the announcement. The formal version with the press release and the depth chart designation is just the paperwork. Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns. The organization told you that already. The only question left is how long before they say it in the words everyone is waiting to hear.